And now it's my pleasure to get us going on a remarkable program for today. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Silicon Valley management and strategy guru, Geoffrey Moore. Geoffrey is an author. Yeah, I heard applause out there. Oh, you're there? You want to go? Good. All right. You're going to take over? This is Jeff. He'll introduce himself.
No, it's fine. Hi. Listen, I want to I'm delighted to have a chance to speak to you today on this issue of business network transformation, because this is probably the most obvious crucible of that kind of transformation going on in the world right now. When you start thinking about transformation, the first thing you want to do is you want to get a firm grasp on the obvious. And let's start by saying here are 7 things that are not going to change due to this digital transformation. Because there's the 7 things I think that bring us together in this room. The first is human beings need symbols from which to construct their identity. We are symbolic creatures. That is the essence of our intellectual and emotional and cultural life. Media and branded CPG, which are the 2 funding elements here, are the major sources of those images and those symbols. That's not going to change. Brands, in order to make their money, need to capture the attention of individuals to participate in this thing, and media has a proven ability to capture that attention, and advertising has a proven ability to convert attention into brand engagement and sales transactions. That's what makes the consumer economy work. That's not changing. And brands are happy to pay for those services, and consumers are willing to pay a premium for brand promises that engage their identities, that they desire or they admire. Okay? So if you take all that together, the consumer economy, the above the line, the whole participation in the nuances of being human, none of that has changed. That is a permanent part of the human condition. So our reason for being has not changed. What has changed is the mechanisms and the media by which we engage in that exchange with human beings. The first, and I'm just going to do 6 things, and again, firm grasp on the obvious. I think all of us in this room know these 6 things. Media is disaggregating, even as it's expanding its reach. That makes it very inconvenient for many of the historical structures by which we monetized inventory in our industry. Delivery is disaggregating, especially at the end point. The amount of fragmentation at the very end point, the number of different devices, the number of different places that we encounter media has dramatically expanded, and that's creating enormous challenges for the industry as a whole. Content is hyperinflating. The amount of content, the only people that are grinning from ear to ear are the disk storage people, right? But it's hyperinflating, it crowds and it clouds. And that's a problem, not so much for this industry, it's a problem for the consumer. And we're going to have to go through a sorting process as a culture to figure out how do we get the signal to noise ratio back to a level that feels right to people, feels right for creating the kinds of moods and experiences that we want to communicate. Social is reaggregating, so we're watching the likes of Facebook do that, but there's new rules of engagement, and even Facebook doesn't know those rules, as it demonstrates about twice a year. And you know, that's just part of being a startup, a little startup, right? $100 billion valued startup, yes, okay. The prior anchors of execution. This is probably the hardest thing for the traditional successful players to deal with. Time and space. Buying a spot at a certain time, a Super Bowl ad is a time and space concept. They're dissolving. Now, they're not disappearing, but they're being marginalized, and they're being marginalized by new anchors of execution in terms of presence and profile. And you just heard Randy talk a lot about the whole issue of how much, do we track or not track or whatever. But as you guys are going to try to educate the world, I want to be profiled in the context of making advertising more successful for me. But the presence and profile, we're just not set up to do that. I mean, we can do it technically, we can't do it at scale, and our industry is not organized around the economics of presence and profile. So this is what's causing business networks to transform. Again, firm grasp on the obvious. You guys are in the middle of this, you know about this. What I want to share with you, though, is some research we did with sponsored by SAP 3 or 4 years ago about business network transformation itself, kind of even stepping back from the media industry specifically. And in doing that, there were kind of two terms we had to sort of nail, and they're not, I don't think they're very astounding terms, but I want you to just want to be clear with them. By a business network, we mean an ecosystem of companies working together that serves a given set of needs. So the IAB represents a business network, okay? The folks in this room. And transformation is a disruption in the current ecosystem, leading to re-engineering of processes and a redistribution of power. It's that last phrase, by the way, that's a little bit chilling for people who have power, right? The incumbents. So if you look at that, I don't think there's anybody in the room that's going to say this is not happening. Like the question is, what the hell does it mean, right? And what can we do about it, okay? And all I'm going to do is share about I just want to share about 6 or 7 slides sort of thinking about where the thinking has developed, at least in my neck of the woods, and I come from Silicon Valley, as part of the venture community and part of the tech community, where we think this is going and what we think can be done about it. So the first thing that came out of this work was when we talked about networks, it became very clear there were two very, very different network models that were interoperating with each other, but were very distinct from each other. And we ended up calling one model the collaborative network, and the other model the coordinated network. And if you look at them, and if you look at the companies at the bottom, you can kind of tell archetypal companies, Goldman, IBM, DreamWorks, Lockheed, that's in collaborative networks, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, coordinated networks. But what's really going on here is the collaborative networks, which are orchestrated, are relationship models that are designed to deal with high complexity emerging situations, very sophisticated projects, that kind of stuff. The coordinated network is designed to deal with high volume and scale, okay? So build up, build out kind of idea. So obviously a collaborative network is very relationship oriented, and in fact relationships, and we used to call Rolodex in a prior era, that your whole set of relationships is in essence the foundation of your power, both personally and organizationally. That's not true in a coordinated network. In a coordinated network, it's all about the transaction, just driving transaction after transaction after transaction. One of these networks is modeled after project teams. The other is modeled after a supply chain or a supply delivery value chain. Okay? The collaborative networks are orchestrated. This is a peer-to-peer relationship. Nobody reports to anybody. Nobody can drive it. But there's always somebody at the center who's the most powerful and who fundamentally leads but cannot command the behavior of the network. Conversely, in a coordinated network, there is a commander. There is a Walmart, there is a Google, there is an Apple, there is an Amazon, and if you are in there at that coordinated network, you will discover very quickly they are the commander, and you are not, okay? And you will do what they say, or you'll get out of the network. And that's how those networks work. This is not an evil act, this is not the evil empire. This is how coordinated networks have worked from time immemorial. But they're two very different patterns. And so the one pattern is all about expertise and innovation and market development, and the other one is about efficiency and speed and adaptability. And they both matter a ton. Now, I just would like to get a sense of the room. So most large companies participate in both networks. You have operational divisions who might characterize their operations by one or the other model. But at the margin, most companies say we have a stronger hand. We are either stronger in the collaborative mode or we're stronger in the coordinated mode. I'd just like to get a show of hands in the audience. How many people see themselves as stronger in the collaborative mode? Just raise your hand. And how many people see you stronger in the coordinated mode? I think we lean a lot toward collaborative, okay, in this audience. Certainly the agency models would do that. Certainly the startups, I think, for a while will be collaborative because, frankly, you can't play very aggressively and coordinated until you get to pretty good scale. Just one set of summary learnings about these two things is I want you to think about your strengths. I want you to think about which time you put up your hand and look at that. How this research characterizes your opportunities. So start with this notion of where do you get your next business from? Collaborative networks get their next business by taking on the next complex challenge that hasn't been solved. And they bring expertise and orchestrated relationships to solving that problem, initially on a project-by-project basis, then on a solution basis, and then eventually on a systems basis. That's not how coordinated networks find their future. Coordinated networks look at what complex systems have done. They look where complex systems are getting a lot of margin and not adding as much value as they used to, and they just chew their way into that flesh. And so what you watch is you watch the ecosystems evolve. The complex systems stakes out a big thing, starts to take advantage of all the profits, gets kind of a little bit complacent, and then the volume ops guys go like a little Pac-Man, at the edge. And the complex systems guys kind of going like this. And finally he says, stop, Okay. So he fights a delaying action, but sooner or later he's got to move on to the next complex challenge. And that's what happens over and over and over again. The transactionalization of the low end driving evolution at the high end going forward. So in that model, what you care about is very different. The complex systems model needs standards and interfaces because it's always trying to orchestrate and modularize and bring things together. Whereas the volume ops model, the coordinated model, needs commoditization. It needs standardization because that's what's going to allow the transactions to scale. That's going to get the price elasticity into the system so it can move forward. If you look at where you kind of recover margin from, the complex systems guys recover margin by going from a project to a solution model and getting very deep in vertical specific problems that do not easily transactionalize. Whereas the volume ops people are saying, I'm going to use mass customization. That's how I'm going to get the added value. So my core product, I'll probably break even on, but I'll make all my money at the edge, at the flanker products and the kind of transactions at the edge of things. And finally, if you look at where your organization is going to be in pain and struggling, it's enormously difficult for complex systems companies to actually acknowledge that something has become commoditized. For a long time, they just say, our brand is really valuable. No, it's not. It's not. Come on. Your work is valuable, and if your brand stands for your work and your work continues to be valuable, then your brand is valuable. But it's not. There's no magic the other way. Come on. And they have a lot of trouble entrusting mission-critical work that's not core to other partners. The volume ops guys, their problem is, particularly the successful ones, the role of concentrator makes so many enemies and scorches the earth so broadly and so deeply, it's very hard for them to engage in any kind of collaborative, cooperative thing going forward because people just don't want to give them any more power. And so they tend to get stuck in these positions. So 2 types of networks, and the question would be, are we at risk? Is our firm at risk in this model? Kind of 7 early warning signs where you think, okay, are we on the high side of this wave, or is this wave going to crash on us? The first one is someone's eating our lunch, but we're not sure who. Okay, as you kind of watch kind of a slight deterioration in the numbers around your business, and you can't quite figure out what it is. But man, it's like this is getting hard. It didn't used to be this hard, right? New players are entering our space and capturing business with our customers. Right? I'm a mobile person. They gave me my smartphone, but the iPad's mobile, but somebody's trying to take my iPad away from me. That kind of stuff. So all of a sudden it's going, whoa, what's going on? Okay? Even our established trading partners are becoming our competitors. And certainly you see this with CPG and any Target and P&G or any of those guys, where the branded thing gets the person into the store, and then the store wants to substitute the store brand, that kind of stuff. Same thing with Class A inventory, Class B inventory in media, same kind of stuff. We can't see upstream in our supply chain anymore, or conversely, we can't see downstream in our demand chain anymore. People are hiding stuff from us, or there's too much disaggregation. We just can't see it, and so we're getting blindsided again and again and again with inventory problems, either too much inventory or not enough inventory, that kind of problem. Business model innovation is becoming a major threat, and we're not the threat. Our business model is the one that's kind of the stationary object that all of the aggressive attacking business models are going after. We have typically, most markets kind of relax into a semi-inefficient state so that we can all make a little money and come to places like the Fontainebleau. But the deal is, eventually those margins attract attract aggressive people coming after them, and it's like, oh my God, we're being undercut. And then power is migrating to new roles in the business network, which we're going to look at on a separate slide. What that means is it's not necessarily that your company has become less powerful in your role, it's that your role is less powerful in the new ecosystem. And that's a really, really tough problem to solve. Okay? But you have to solve it, or eventually your organization gets marginalized and then eventually disappears. So what I want to do is just share some of the ideas that came out of this around, first of all, who and what is involved in what's going on. And then I'm going to look at a second slide, which is where and when do we see this thing happening right now. And then the last slide is why and how is this thing unfolding, and particularly how can we get out in front of it. So I've just got three more slides to share with you to give you some thinking about this. By the way, these slides are available from IAB, and if you're interested in, please, by all means, get a copy of them. So let's play this out. Okay? So on the who and what slide, then I'm an outsider. I am not part of the IAB community. I'm part of the tech community. So this is a little bit of an outsider looking in at your industry right now. And I think actually it'd be very interesting to see how you guys would handicap this thing. But here are the disruptive forces, kind of the usual suspects are named in the middle. And I took 8 different entities, and I just asked myself, is their power going up, down, or sideways? So here is one, this is called a focus group of 1. Right? Okay. So consumer packaged goods, I think, is going sideways. Okay. I don't think it's getting better. I don't think it's getting worse in this thing. The better is more reach, but the worse is more price transparency, price shopping. The commoditized brands, I think, are getting some advantage there. So I called it an even. I think ad agencies and media buyers are really, really in a tough spot, because the 30-second spot, which has sort of like been the anchor product of the industry for all of my adult life, is basically, it's not going to go away, but it's been highly marginalized, and therefore there's a forced re-engineering in those areas. Ad networks, on the other hand, I'm at Moore David now, by the way. It's a venture firm, so companies like Audience Sciences and Rocket Fuel and who are members of the community here, I think they participate in this world. Many of you do as well. The venture community is very interested in this world still, because it's still an emerging, rising tide floats all boats state. Artists and content owners, well, you heard Randy talk about PIPA and SOPA, right? And the whole thing. I spent some time with the Copyright Clearance Center as well. So on the one hand, the internet has got fabulous reach. On the other hand, it's got a lot of piracy, and they're figuring out, where are we with that? Do I think content eventually will be king? Yes, I do. But I think it can't really exert its lordship until it gets the environment re-engineered in a way that it can kind of protect its boundaries. I think broadcast media, at least the kind of broadcast media I grew up, is definitely losing power. And it's also, but it's interesting how it's dealing with that, because it's kind of going over it used to say you go over the top or tear down the walled garden. Now it's going over its own top going forward. Social networks clearly, I think, obviously are gaining power for the same thing, particularly obviously Facebook. Analytics, again, that's a big theme in the venture community. We're involved with a company here called Visible Measures, but there's tons of analytics companies here. It's exciting. It's an exciting place to be. And clearly, you can't play this game, the visibility problem, upstream and downstream, without uber powerful geeks. So Wall Street, the financial crisis of 2008 just transferred a bunch of those algo geeks from finance to media, right? And we'll take them forward. And interestingly, search, I said, was sideways. I mean, it's kind of hard to see. You look at Google, that's a pretty amazing place to be. But I think search is kind of peaked. I think you're watching Siri kind of overlay search in one interesting way. I think search is going to get kind of OEM'd into a whole bunch of different things. So anyway, I put it sideways. But the point about this exercise is it isn't what I think. It's what you and your colleagues think about what's going on with your role in the ecosystem. Do you get a red arrow, a blue arrow, or a green arrow, right? You got to have and you got to get your organization to agree on which way the arrow is pointing, because if you just bring out your performance indicators, you could say, hey, we've got great results, we're winners. Well, maybe you're just in a green arrow category, dude. And conversely, this is horrible, we have to change. Well, maybe you're in a red arrow situation, right? So the problem with financial performance is it's a trailing indicator. And the problem with business networks disruption is it requires leading indication responses. You have to act ahead of the data, which is why you have to have this discussion around where are we. how soon do we have to act, right? Because all human beings will postpone anything as long as they possibly can, right? Anything difficult. So I think at the heart, there are three things we have to act about: digital content, digital ad networks, data analytics. At least those were my three. I would argue on those particular three, content is out, that horse has been out of the barn. It's over, game over, get over it. Figure out a way to re-engineer around it, let's move on. I don't think advertising is tipped yet, which is amazing, but year after year you still see more eyeballs on the web, more ad dollars elsewhere, but it's obviously coming, but I don't think it's tipped yet. And the reason why that's so important is, once it tips, whoever are the market leaders at that time tend to get institutionalized as the permanent gorillas in the new ecosystem. Until it's tipped, you can overthrow a gorilla back and forth. But once it tips, it's very, very hard to overthrow a gorilla. It happens occasionally, but it's very hard. So if it hasn't tipped yet, really strong impetus, and you're winning, you better start going faster before somebody else gets in your lane. And if you're losing, you still have a shot at it, but not much time. And I think analytics is clearly the interesting place right now, because it just feels like it's such an underserved element in what is going to be a massive demand within this whole ecosystem for that capability. So when and where you are, but again, it doesn't matter what I say. What matters is what you and your organization believe as to, are we before, during, or after the tipping point for our company's role, the role for all our type of company, and then for our company's status within the stack of companies that provide that role to the ecosystem. Where are we in terms of before, during, or after the tipping point, which I think arguably would say post-tipping point, it's very, very hard to change outcomes. And finally, I want to share with you a graphic which was no expense was spared on this graphic, because no expense was incurred on this graphic. But I want to show you a kind of a way of thinking about the challenge of your customer base, particularly the CPG world and the media world. What are they trying to do in this digital world that's different? This is a different framework. This is a kind of a design to replace the framework called awareness, consideration, trial, purchase, that whole thing. Well, here's how I think it's playing out in the digital world. I think there's a gear. I'm going to look at 4 gears. There's a gear called we need to acquire. We need to just attract and acquire eyeballs or customers or consumers or whatever it is. There's a gear called engage. I need to engage them. There's a gear called monetize, okay? And there's a gear called enlist. Now, enlist means I've gotten them to actually work on behalf of my brand or my capability. So when people are truly enlisted, you watch things go viral, that you actually get a kicker on any promotional spend because your customer community is actually helping you do stuff. We saw this in the support communities as well, these customer-enabled support communities. If you're kind of not getting a kicker, that's called retention, and if you're getting a negative spin on this thing, that's called churn, right? And so the enlistment gear turns out to be pretty important. Well, the way this thing works is you say, look, an entrepreneur is kind of like a starter motor, and they start running these experiments. And they twist the acquisition gear, and they twist the engage, twist monetization. They're just trying to figure out what might work. And then if the enlistment thing could maybe get the acquisition thing going, and maybe get the engagement thing going, and then maybe the monetization thing going, and gosh, if I can get them going, maybe I can get a tornado, right? And this is kind of the dream of every venture capitalist, right? My company is going to do this with its stuff. Well, when you look at that model, you say, okay, look, the 2 gears that everybody sees and that are the easiest to measure are the acquisition gear and the monetization gear. They tend to equate to the below-the-line spend. The 2 gears that affect the outcomes in more long-term sense, we call the power gears, which is how much are you able to engage and how much are you able to enlist. Because engagement ultimately is the power that drives monetization, and enlistment is the power that multiplies acquisition. And if you think about and that tends to be above the line kinds of activities. Engagement and enlistment are not transactional, right? Whereas acquisition and monetization are. One of the dangers in your industry right now is because it is easier for the digital landscape today to cope with transactional outcomes, you're watching a disproportionate amount of spend go below the line. That is not appropriate for the economy, but it's because the systems can do it so much better. So part of what's incumbent on the folks in this room, I believe, is to get the systems that allow engagement and enlistment to scale, which means getting the right analytics and getting the right digital rights management, getting the right, all the stuff you guys got to do to make it work. That's where I think the focus has got to be. So just to close on this, because I think Randy and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on Q&A with this. 4 thoughts about the future of digital marketing. The problem is on the complex system side of the house, not the volume ops side of the house right now. Right now, the volume ops side of the house is way ahead, and the complex system side of the house is struggling to re-engineer the fundamental economics of this industry right now, and you're behind. And you need to move faster. And the problem is, everybody has a sense of entitlement. In fact, what happens is the people that have the power under the old system cling to it, right? Typically until the Titanic actually gets under the water, right? You go down with the ship, but you go down slowly, and you do not go graceful into that good night or whatever that line is. The new complex ecosystems will self-organize around scarce IP. I think that'll be content, creative, and analytics. I think that's where it's going to be at. But if you're in the new thing, you just got to go and just take over this world. You just have to, because until you take it over, it's going to kind of limp along. And if you're playing this game of being, I'm in the old and I'm trying to get to the new, you got to learn how to bridge. You got to learn how to bridge. If I'm in one of those red arrows going down, I have to look to a blue or a green arrow and say, okay, I need to bridge my business model. I'm not getting out of this thing. We're still going to sell 30-minute spots 10 years from now on television. But that's not the power place. I need to bridge to some place else, maybe by partnering or acquiring with some other capability, but we got to move on. So that the old can transition to the new. And your job is to get your firm in position before that's too late. And this is kind of a Domino's pizza thing about clocks ticking, dude. I mean, it's not. We are toward the witching hour. In that context, by the way, just one last shameless plug. This is a book I've just come out with. I care passionately about it. But if you'll notice the subtitle of it, "Free Your Company's Future from the Pull of the Past." It's kind of about this. And so if you find yourself wanting to have a creative idea or two about how you might go about it, I would hope you would do that. With that, I want to say thank you very much. I enjoyed having a chance to share some thoughts with you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Maybe Randy? Yeah.
Don't move. We have mic runners throughout this audience, so we really want to take questions. While you're formulating your thoughts, Jeff, I thought I would throw one question at you from the very end. You said that content, creative, and analytics is really the new power center. The problem that technology companies see with that is they don't find a way for it to scale. And they're VC funded, and they all want to cash out with billions and billions of dollars. Can you reconcile the importance of content, creative, and analytics to the need for this VC-funded side of the industry to find scale?
Well, I'm not clear that I think analytics needs to be VC-funded. It's not clear to me that content or creative do. There's this classic thing where we have an engine that will monetize the existing resource. Performance left to its own device will essentially take power to zero by monetizing everything. And at some point, it's like, guys, we've got to invest in the future. Data analytics VC will fund. I think content and creative may get funded by other ways.
Well, does that mean that so much of the investment that's flowing into the technology side of the industry is basically going to be non-return investment in kind of creating a commodity infrastructure that allows creative and content to flourish?
Be careful. A commodity infrastructure has a massive return. It's not the same margins. And I think one of the things we've got to be careful of is, I think the bias in the audience is toward the collaborative network and the more complex systems organization. Those organizations need 30, 40, 50, 60 points of margin. Amazon needs what? 8? Mm-hmm. So the game, they're two very different games, and when one person loses doesn't mean the other person loses. Mm-hmm.
I just want to see, are there questions out there? You can't, it's hard for me to see. It's not that early, is it? Wait, we got one?
Okay.
What? Who? Yes? Hi. Go ahead.
Good. Hi.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yep. Hi.
Who are you?
Sorry, Andy Breen from Medialits.
Oh, good.
So, interesting presentation. I can see how the gear slide that you had up there applies to the transactional organizations quite well and quite, in many cases, easily measured. But are those adequate for the collaborative organization? Are those adequate measures and metrics to use?
No, I think that the way that I would ask the collaborative organization to look at those gears is, this is the problem we need to engineer the next generation of systems to solve. And the way I would use the models, I would say, the ecosystem is only as successful as its slowest gear. So whatever gear is going the most slowly is the gear that, and I think that works, by the way, for dealing with a client, as a dialogue with your client, but I also think it works as a dialogue with the industry. Which of those gears is the one that's being slowed down the most? Okay. One of the things we've learned in Silicon Valley, by the way, is don't start the monetization gear too early, for example, because it can interfere with the enlistment gear. Get people really revved up, and then introduce it, kind of like a clutch, let the monetization gear, and don't pop the clutch,
My old eyes believe they see way in the back Mike Donahue from the 4A's raising his hand.
Thanks, Randy. Geoffrey, do you think companies are using their analytic opportunities enough to find out what really engages consumers before they start creating the messaging?
It's interesting. So we've seen a lot of the rise of the A/B test, which is rather than try to be creative, you are creative, but you're creative in a very algorithmic way. And I think for generating certain kinds of engagement, solving certain kinds of engagement problems, okay. But I think for the hyper engagement, the kind of the really powerful engagement things, I'm probably betraying my age, but I'm still an individual creative or community creative kind of thing. And I think that is done. I think that still requires a lot of synapses and among a very few creative folks. That's where I think that happens.
I see Dave Morgan from Simul Media right over here.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, thank you very much. It was really a great presentation. What about the people issue? I mean, when we have these collaborative networks that are very complex, that may need to become coordinated networks to, have their next stage of growth, can the institutions transition with the same people? Do you need to swap out the people with different skill sets to do that?
Yeah, I do think it's too. I think there's a transitional moment, but we talk about inventors, deployers, and optimizers, and inventors and deployers tend to play in the complex world, and deployers and optimizers tend to play in the volume world. And when you're kind of transitioning, we have this fourth role called orchestrators who sort of try to help do that. But part of the reason I wanted to put the two models in front of you is a lot of the problems that complex systems companies have with volume ops companies is that they're talking past each other because they're not respecting each other's business models. And it's really important to say, look, just the volume guy is chewing at the bottom of the complex systems guy, which annoys the hell out of him. But he's got to understand that's the function of the volume ops model. And now you don't capitulate, you don't give up, but you're fighting a delaying action, and at the same time, you've got to be exploring whatever the next opportunity is.
What I'm wondering, Jeff, is maybe there's a kind of a battle here over what advertising itself actually is. There's one way to look at classic time and space advertising and say, oh, it's the ultimate commodity, a 30-second spot or a magazine page. There can't be a more pure commodity than that. But there's an entirely other way to look at it and say, no, this is an ultimate value-add service that just happens to operate on a standardized foundation of a page or a 30-second spot. And so viewed from one angle, commodity, it's subject to your the coordinated network. Right. Viewed the other way, it's subject to the complex network. Is that why they're talking past each other?
And I think so. And there's also this thing we had this conversation about above the line, below the line.
Yeah.
So in the absence of intervention, the container will overwhelm the content. It will commoditize everything. We'll put it on any piece of inventory. We'll shove it out through behavioral targeting. And by the way, that kind of works. But if you're going to genuinely engage and genuinely enlist, you go back to the human being's need for symbols. That is an above-the-line world. It's not, and that does require the complex systems people to think of what is the next set of themes and imagery that can genuinely, capture the attention and enlistment of human beings.
So it sounds like the potential for the future is not really that dissimilar to what we had in the 20th century, where you'll have kind of a handful of companies that, kind of like the broadcast networks or maybe some other kinds of network-based operations today that are able to profit from scale infrastructure, and then a whole variety of smaller creative companies and whether we call them advertising agencies or movie producers, or is that kind of?
Yeah, I think the thing we got to realize is the way we used to monetize that second group has changed. So like the media buying model, the whole way and so until that we engineer the next generation infrastructure, what's going to end up happening is the complex systems people are not going to be able to monetize their value add properly for the interim. Yeah, that's what's going on.
Other questions out there? Other thoughts? Yes, we've got one right here.
Hi, Joe Prendy.
Yep.
Hi, Joe Prendy Collective. You know, obviously the coordinated network screams automated, right? Transactional, and then the coordinated or the collaborative network, you would say, is more manual or labor intensive. But can you have a collaborative network that's highly automated? That's what I see. I think, why can't that be very automated, and why does everything transactional needs to be automated? And then the second part of the question is, in the media business, what we're in right now, right, it's becoming more automated and more real time. How do you see that unfolding? Right. As manual, current processes versus automated processes moving forward?
So a couple of things. By the way, that was an entrepreneur talking, because he's thinking, oh, and how can I actually solve the real problem, which is how would you scale collaborative? I think two things. I think, first of all, there's some technology now that is improving the productivity of collaborative. That's not scale, but like the telepresence and a lot of the more session-oriented collaborative things, I think that's helping people pull people together. I think wherever you can transactionalize, you will, but it's a little bit like healthcare. There's a bunch of healthcare things you can solve at the nurse level or at the paraprofessional level, and then there's like, no, I need to have the diagnostic from the doctor. So I think that model holds. I think we've gotten lazy with the model, and we're using complex systems infrastructure for things that, frankly, automated things could handle. And so as we have in healthcare, as we have in education. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to sort of chew away at that sort of inefficient place. In terms of the media model itself at scale, this is where the internet's acting on us more than we're going to act on the internet for a while. It just the way in which this thing is scaling is still relatively unpredictable. Randy's comment about SOPA and PIP and how that played out. It's a black swan, except as we were discovering on Wall Street, these black swans keep swimming by again and again and again. It's like, what the hell? Is there like an epidemic of black swans? And so there's a little bit of that, I think, still going on. I think, yeah.
Good. Well. We are out of time, but I want to thank you for a really stimulating opening, Jeff.
Thank you,
made a
Randy.
lot of us
Appreciate it.
think.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.